X-Men Dark Phoenix is the brand new and presumably final entry in the Fox X-Men franchise. I know New Mutants is still due for release sometime next year, but I'm just calling it right now. That film is not getting a theatrical release. That is probably going to get released either on home video or is never coming out in the cinemas. So treat this as the final X-Men film because it probably will be. And this film stars all of the cast from the prequel trilogy, the First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse. And this film takes place in the 1990s, where the X-Men have finally now gained the respect of mankind, and they are sent on a mission to rescue crew members on a shuttle in space. But in the event of doing so, Jean Grey, played by Sophie Turner, unexpectedly absorbs the Phoenix Force inside of her. And at first she's fine, but over the course of the movie, it slowly starts to take control of her, and its true power it slowly starts to be revealed as the members of the X-Men have to decide what actions they need to take when facing against her. I wasn't too excited for this movie going into it, which is weird because I am admittedly quite a big fan of the Fox X-Men films. I'm not one of those people who really hates on it a lot. Even films like X-Men The Last Stand and X-Men Apocalypse, I actually don't dislike. But weirdly enough, I just wasn't excited for Dark Phoenix going into it. The trailers didn't do it for me, especially the first one. Whoever authorized that trailer to get released, I hope they got fired the day afterwards, because when you have scenes like this in your movie...
Tell me how we fix this, Charles. Tell me what to do. I don't know what to do.
It makes me very worried about what your final product is going to turn out like. And I'm sad to say that for me, my worries sadly came true. Now, I will go through my positives first. There were actually things that I could take away from this in a positive light. In terms of performance-wise, I think the best performer in this film was easily Sophie Turner. I really liked her in this film. I didn't mind her in Apocalypse, but we really didn't see enough of her, whereas in this film, she's very much front and center. She is basically the main character of the film. I mean, she's the title character for a reason. And I think Sophie Turner does a very, very good job with this movie. Now, the material that she's given to work with is very iffy at times. In fact, for quite a lot of times in this film. But you can tell that Sophie Turner is doing her absolute best to make this material that is pretty awful in places make it as good as she can make it, and I think she did a very good job in this movie, especially with a lot of the very emotional scenes. I thought she did a really, really good job. And my other big compliment with this movie was the score by Hans Zimmer was absolutely phenomenal. In the moments in the film where they were trying to make the audience feel a lot of emotion, and the writing and maybe at certain points the acting wasn't doing it for me, it was the score that was making me feel the emotion of the scenes. And Hans Zimmer, I mean, I'd say it's one of his best scores that he's done in recent years. This alongside his score of Blade Runner 2049, I really enjoyed it, and I had a really great time listening to it on Spotify, and it works incredibly well with the movie itself. Some of the CGI was okay, and some of the fight scenes were okay, and that's about it for the positives for me personally, because I really struggled to enjoy this movie throughout its entire runtime. In fact, I think this video will perfectly sum up my thoughts on this movie.
That is one big pile of shit.
Yeah, this movie, I didn't really enjoy it, to be perfectly honest. To kickstart these negatives, let's talk about something that has always bothered me, especially with this film and Apocalypse. Why do these movies have to constantly hop decades in between them? It made sense with First Class. First Class takes place in the 60s, then Days of Future Past cut forward to the 70s, which I was fine with. I was fine with that time jump if they just left it there. But then in Apocalypse, they jump to the 80s, and these characters have literally not aged a day. And then this film takes place in the 90s, which the film never properly states. I only knew about it because I looked up the official description of the film, and it states that the film takes place in 1992. And these characters, again, have not aged a single day since X-Men First Class. I just find this such a stupid gimmick. And the reason it frustrates me is because in the first two films, the way that they integrated the timeline and the conflicts going in the real world and how they bended that into the actual story of the film was so well done. It made it feel almost like a period piece. Whereas with here, it's literally just, let's just jump forward 10 years because we can. A lot of the actors in this film as well, I just felt like they were foaming in their performances so badly. The worst case scenario of this is by far Jennifer Lawrence. You could just tell she doesn't want to be in this film. Her performance as Mystique was so incredibly bland. That X-Women line, don't worry, it's just the shit in the actual film, as it was in that preview clip that was released. And her death in this film, and no, that's not a spoiler because Simon Kinberg flat out said in interviews that Mystique does die in this movie. Her death scene in this film I found unintentionally funny. and it should have been this really emotional moment, and it wasn't, because not only was Mystique very uninteresting throughout the entire movie, but you could just tell that Jennifer Lawrence didn't want to be there. Also, her makeup in this film, like the Mystique makeup, they put literally no effort into that. Like, you compare that makeup to the one that she had in the original trilogy, and then in X-Men First Class and Days of Future Past. Here, it's just awful. You know, that just shows how much effort they really did put into the Mystique character for this film. But she's not the only one that I felt like was a bit off in this movie. Nicholas Hoult, a lot of times in this film, an actor who I really like, I just felt was very off. And especially what they do with this character in this film at the midway point just felt very out of left field, and it didn't really match up with his character in the previous 3 films. Michael Fassbender, he's good in the film, but it does feel like at times he's just going through the motions. Same with James McAvoy. They're not terrible in the movie. The performances, they just don't feel as empathetic or as powerful or as emotional as those previous 3 films. I don't know if it's them or the writing, or if they just don't want to be there. I don't know, but something just felt off with a lot of the actors in this film, and it was just really unusual. And speaking of Magneto, he really didn't need to be in this movie. He's literally only there just so they could keep a hold of Michael Fassbender, because Magneto really should not have been in this film. Same with the Dabari. I thought they are some of the worst villains I've seen in a comic book movie in some time. Jessica Chastain, you cast an actress of her caliber, and you give her a character who is so bland and wooden with such a generic motivation. Terrible villains. A lot of the other characters as well get so wasted in this film. Scott, for me, doesn't really do a lot in the film, and really he should have been one of the main characters, because him and Jean Grey's relationship, you know, he really should be forefront and center, but they don't. He feels like a B-list character when he should feel like an A-list. And another problem I have with this entire thing was with the Dark Phoenix storyline. It feels so rushed. It feels as if they tried so hard just to rush to this storyline. We only saw this version of Jean Grey for like maybe 20 minutes of screen time in X-Men Apocalypse, so we've not really built up a proper connection with this character, and not really seen her relationship with Scott blossom, really. We've not seen them together as a couple or getting to know each other as a couple. At least with the original trilogy, we had 2 movies setting up those 2 characters and their relationship, and setting up how Jean has this powers that are far stronger than what she initially believes. At least there was a decent amount of setup there, so that when we got to the 3rd film and we did the Dark Phoenix storyline, at least we really got to know these characters and really got to care about them. But here they just rushed it so badly and expected the audience just to care about them just because they should know these characters from the comics. That's not how it works, and it's such an irritating thing that this film does. But get back on point, yes, Scott is wasted in this film. Quicksilver is brutally wasted in this film. He's only in there for about the first half of the film for a few scenes. Absolute waste of the character, because I really loved him in Days of Future Past and Apocalypse, and so did everybody else. So I find it so strange as to why he was taken out of the picture so quickly. Storm was wasted in this movie. Basically, the rest of the characters that aren't Magneto, Charles Xavier, Raven, Beast, or Dark Phoenix, they are non-essential to this film, and they get barely anything to do. The visual effects as well at times, I really didn't think were that good. There were a lot of effects that looked very, very shoddy in the film and very uninspiring, and I just didn't particularly like a lot of the fight sequences. They didn't really stand out to me. The only one that did was the final battle on the train sequence, which apparently was an entire reshoot. I will say that was the best action sequence, but it wasn't very memorable to me. It didn't have the memorability factor of any of the previous X-Men film fights, especially like the end of Days of Future Past or the final fight in First Class. It just did not have any sense of memorability towards it. Nothing about it that really made it stand out. What they do with Charles in this movie was also really, really strange. They have this thing with him where they make him very fame hungry and a bit of a dickhead, and they never set this up in any of the other films. What they do with him and Jean and what he does to Jean in this film, it's very similar, funny enough, to what they did with him in X-Men The Last Stand, but at least with The Last Stand, the way they went about it was that you understood why Charles did it, whereas in this film, he just comes across as an absolute dickhead, and it's just so poorly written. They marketed it as saying, oh, we're trying so hard to avoid what we did in The Last Stand, yet there are a lot of similarities between how they do the Dark Phoenix here and how they did it in The Last Stand, probably because Simon Kinberg, who directed, wrote, and produced this film, also wrote X-Men The Last Stand. And that brings me on nicely to my final big criticism with this film, which is just The directing, Simon Kinberg for me, I just do not think was the right choice for this film. His directing style to me was very bland. It was very much reverse shot, cut back, reverse shot. It was very bystander. They tried to keep it grounded when really that is not what this story needed. It needed to be out there because their horrible attempts at trying to keep it at a grounded level just did not work. The writing was all over the place, and the thing is that I can't really point the finger at anyone else because he had the three main roles in this film of writing, directing, and producing. So this is entirely his vision, and it just does not work. There is nothing unique about it. There's nothing about it that really makes it stand out other than the fact that it's so bland compared to Bryan Singer or Matthew Vaughn's other films that they've done. And to end this all off, the way that they try to wrap up the film in the final 5 minutes to try and tie up as many loose ends in this franchise as possible, because of course this is the final X-Men film, felt so rushed. It felt very much like a last minute rewrite, almost as if they realised at the last minute, shit, we're not going to have any more after this, let's try and write an ending. And it just felt very anticlimactic, and there are so many things they tried to do to add this sense of finality to the film that completely contradict with the series' timeline. But then again, this X-Men franchise has never ever really given a shit about its timeline. At the end of the day, the actual ending to the film, not just the final 5 minutes, it just felt very by the numbers and bystander to me. They tried to make it emotional, but it just didn't really hit me in the feels. And just overall, it was a very underwhelming ending to the movie, even though I did enjoy the final action sequence. The actual ending and payoff to the story, I just didn't think was all that engaging. So for my final rating for Dark Phoenix, again, very, very disappointed with this film. I have to be perfectly honest, I would rather watch X-Men Origins Wolverine than this movie, simply for the fact that with X-Men Origins Wolverine, at least with that film, I can laugh at how bad it is. There is at least some entertainment in how shit it is, and I could at least have it on in the background. With Dark Phoenix, I'm not sure if I could honestly have this film on in the background. I just didn't particularly enjoy it. The only parts I enjoyed, like I said earlier, were Sophie Turner and Hans Zimmer's score. Other than that, this film is very middle of the road to disappointing. I'm going to give this movie a 3 out of 10. It might be quite low, but I have to be honest with myself. I just was not that engaged with the film, and I did find it very underwhelming for me personally. I tried my absolute best to go into this with thinking that it could really be something special, and I just found it very uninspiring for me personally, and I'm so disappointed that this is how we have to say goodbye to this brand of characters, because we won't see these characters again. And like I said earlier, it's just a shame that this series just has to go out on such a whimper. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this review, please go ahead and smash a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. And let me know down in the comment section down below, what did you think of this film? And with that being said, I'll see you all again for the next video. Goodbye.